All right, hey, today, now I'm excited because we start a brand new series on the book of Daniel. Now, I don't know what you think of when you think of the book of Daniel. I have no idea because things change. Now, let me forgive you. Okay. When I was growing up, or let's go back to the 1970s, if you got up and said, hey, we're going to start a brand new series on Daniel next week, the place would be packed out. Now, that was in the 1970s. Now, you get to the late 80s and 90s, if you talk about spiritual gifts, people showed up. I don't know what gets people out today, but probably not mentioning the book of Daniel. That's just like, Daniel who? Anyway, but that's where we're at. Old Testament book. Old Testament. Hey, one pastor said, and he's a late pastor. He died a while back. And he said he actually got to preach this book twice. And I thought, wow, okay, so I'm preaching it now. Maybe in 10 years, you can't redo it in a couple years. I could preach it again. This is my favorite book of the Bible. Anyway, I'm going to talk about that, but anyway. Hey, but my dad taught me years ago, this was back in the 70s, before my dad even went to church. And he told me, and he's a pretty good observer of culture, probably more so than me, I don't know. And he told me, he says, you know what I've noticed? He said, I've noticed that when people are doing well, say financially, economically, they tend to not go to church as much as people who life's not going as well for. But then if adversity strikes, they gravitate back to church. And I've seen that happen. In fact, I had a friend, I knew a guy, and his marriage was having problems a couple years ago, and so he would come every week, bring his kids, and we'd go to Starbucks, hang out, have coffee, and we did that a lot. Well, when his marriage fell apart and he got another girlfriend, he quit coming. He didn't need God then, right? I was like, the craziest thing. I don't know. But think about that. Prosperity, we'll just say prosperity or pain. Wouldn't you want God in your life during both times? The good times as well as the bad? Isn't it funny? It's like when we're in pain, we want prosperity or we want to get past the pain. So we go to God, but then if things go well, I don't need God. And it's like, well, wouldn't you want God both times? Well, we're going to the book of Daniel, and just to give you the background, and we're just going to hit the high points today, and then we get into the book, first verse, next week. Daniel was taken hostage, captive by a foreign nation. So he's living in exile in Babylon, and he thrives as a believer. And it's incredible. So he writes this book to people, to the Israelites, to the Jews who are living in exile, who are living in pain, and he gives them hope. And so we've titled the series, Hope Rekindled. Because you want to know if there's any hope living in exile. So Daniel, and you're going to see it in his life, Daniel had elevated positions in the government. In Babylon, and then later on in Persia, in the Persian Empire. It's just he had an incredible ride. And he thrived whether he was doing well or whether he was being taken hostage. So how do you do so well under all types of circumstances? How do you thrive as a believer? How do you live a life of long obedience in the same direction? How do you do that? Not many do. Not many do. And we meet him when he's about 15 years old. 15. Now, you just got to think about that. We're talking about a teenager taken hostage, ripped from his home, taken to a foreign country, indoctrinated in a foreign country, and maintains his faith all the way through. Never shakes his faith is never shaken. Not one iota. How? How is that possible? We go with him all the way to about 530 BC. When we finally get to the end of the book, he's probably close to 90 years old. Wow, the book of Daniel. My love for the Old Testament began several decades ago in my grandmother's bedroom. My grandfather died. I was little. I never knew my grandfather. And so my grandmother sold her house, and we had a house out at the time past Tyson's Corner. My grandmother, her house was near Fairfax Circle, if you're familiar with the area. And very nice house at the time. And my grandfather was in real estate, and he was like an appraiser or whatever. But anyway, so when he died, my grandmother moved in with us. And so we had a split-level house out in an area called Drainsville. And I went to Great Falls Elementary School. Well, anyway, so my grandmother lived with us. And she had a bedroom in the basement right underneath my bedroom. And I remember that because I had a bunk bed with my brother Mark. And, I'm 5 or 6 years old, and I would fall out of the top bunk. Okay? And I didn't get hurt, but she would hear me, and then she'd come get me, But anyway, because she could hear me because she was right below me. Anyway, but when I was 5 or 6 years old, she would tell us stories, Old Testament stories. I don't remember all the Old Testament stories, but I do remember Daniel in the lion's den and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I'm just talking 5 or 6 years old. And that's where probably one of the greatest influences in my life was right there. So that's where it started. And it's just, I think I say it later, and I wrote it down somewhere. When I began to study the Bible, the first book I studied was Daniel. First book. I mean, it just was. Now, I think sometimes our first thought, Daniel. Okay, this book was written over 2,500 years ago. And you're like, well, I mean, the Old Testament, it's like, man, it has odd stuff in it. And it does. And you think, what could I possibly get out of the Old Testament? You think of all the rules, the rituals, and you know what? There's weird stuff in the Bible. There is. And Ezekiel's got strange visions. Then you get to the genealogies, and people don't read the Old Testament. They don't. So my goal, I hope when we're done, you'll fall in love with this book. It's an incredible book. I mean, just to study it. I get to study it every week now. It's like, wow. Can't get enough. My first sermon I ever preached in my life came from Daniel. Now, I'm saying all that because think about it. This began at the age of 5 or 6. I don't know, one day you may be a grandmother. Think of the influence you can have. I'm just telling you. It's an incredible book. But I suppose one of the most fascinating things is about Daniel is his life illustrates Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. How could a guy at the age of 15 be taken hostage by a foreign army, never get back to his home country? How could that possibly work out for good? How? Well, it does. And God allows things to come into our lives for our good and his glory that we don't see on the front end. But I know this, that everything that comes through our life runs through the divine filter. It just does. Every one of your cars has an air filter. And it gets dirty. Not everything gets through. All right? And you go get your oil changed, they check the air filter, and they add time to change it. I'm telling you, everything that runs through your life goes through the divine filter. Not everything gets through, but some does. All right? This past semester, I taught a class on economics, and Carol, I have to do all this stuff for the students, and I don't know, anyway, reports or whatever. And so Carol put together a report for me, and she told me how to do it. So I'm on my laptop, and then she's, okay, do this, and okay, she told me how to do it. I had no clue. I don't know how she made that thing. I'm not a tech person at all. All right. And here's what I'm saying. The computer that I have, okay, it's just a laptop. That thing has far more relevance for my life than I'm even aware of it. She showed me. I didn't know. I didn't even know it could do that. And I am telling you that the Old Testament is more relevant for your life than you understand. I am telling you that right now. It's just incredible. But the problem is, because I'm not as tech, one of the things I've done, I've tried to eliminate some digital stuff out of my life. Are you with me? Because I'm just not going to get there. But here's the deal. My fear is that some of you will approach the Old Testament and you'll be like, I don't need that. And you'll eliminate some good stuff. And you just don't want to do that. All right? So hopefully, as we go through, I will bring out as much helpful material as I can. Obviously, once again, when you teach through the Bible, you can only say so much. But I can tell you that Daniel, the book of Daniel, over 2,500 years old, is helpful every day of the week. Every day of the week. So I'm going to give you 15 quick thoughts on the book of Daniel, 15 reasons why we should read and study the book of Daniel. All right, number one, I've already alluded to it, but number one, it's captured the attention of all ages, from children to scholars. And you've heard the stories, and they resonated with you, and you liked them. And we're going to look at them too in a little more detail probably than you looked at when you were a kid. But you wanted to hear them over and over and over again. You know, it's funny. Here I am. I've read the book of Daniel for over 40 years. If you go back to my grandmother, over 50 years. I still like reading those stories. Still like it. It just never gets old. Never gets old. And I know some of you watch shows on Netflix multiple times. When Rachel and Dan, my daughter and son-in-law, were at the house over Christmas, they're watching on their laptop episodes of The Office that they've already seen. How many times you got to watch that? Still laughing. I'm just telling you. Okay, so you got time, you should read the book of Daniel. You could read chapter 1. We won't discuss all of 1 next week, but you could read it. And then the scholars, they love the book of Daniel too. There's a lot of what people might call deep stuff. I don't know what deep means, but I understand people get a little fearful of what you call deep stuff. My goal is to hit the deep stuff, and you never know we're in the deep water, all right? It's going to stay, I don't like to use the word shallow either, but anyway. When I was a kid, and, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years old, we would travel. Eventually, when my grandmother was 7, she moved to Arizona and stayed there. And that's a long story, so I won't tell you. But so from age 7, so about age 8 and 9 and all that, we would travel to Balmorhea, Texas on the way. We had friends who lived in Texas. Balmorhea, Texas is in West Texas, and it's just a small town, a couple hundred people. But they had this outdoor swimming pool, which was billed as the largest outdoor swimming pool in the world. Now, it didn't have a concrete bottom, and it's not a pool like you think of, but it was a big pool, and they had, 20 feet deep, 30 feet deep. They had one area 50 feet deep. Now, as a kid, you think about that. You're 8 or 9 years old. 20 feet, okay, I'll go off the diving board. But 50 feet, listen, I was scared. I didn't go in the 50-foot section. That's deep. Now think about that. If you can swim in 20, you can swim in 50. When you're swimming 20, do you go down and hit the bottom? No. Same as going in 50. But see, it's just the idea that it's 50 feet deep. I can't handle that. So, all I'm saying is when you come to a difficult portion of Scripture, it's okay. Spend some time there. Spend some time. And I hope when we're done, you'll feel more at ease. I hope you'll feel comfortable at every verse in the book of Daniel. All right? Because we're going to hit every verse. We're not going to slide over anything. All right? It's a book for everybody, though. Okay, number 2. In the New Testament, its prophecies are referred to more than any other book. Now, I'm not going to give you a bunch of references today or anything like that. The point is, you need to know Daniel if you're going to know and understand the New Testament. Number 3, it contains more fulfilled prophecy than any other book. And we'll get to those. All right? Number 4, the circumstances surrounding Daniel provide an incredible wake-up call. When the book opens, very first verse, many Israelites have been taken to another country. The temple has been looted. Eventually it's going to be destroyed. Jerusalem's going to be leveled. And the people are confused. Why? 2 Chronicles 36:16 says, but they, that is the people of Israel, they kept mocking the messengers of God, despising his word, scoffing at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, until there was no remedy. And so next week, my message title is, We Reap What We Sow. And so we're going to talk about that. But it's an incredible wake-up call. As a believer. Number 5. From the outside, the Hebrew religion has been completely discredited. Okay? Now that's huge because we live in an era where people try to discredit Christianity all the time. And usually they bring up things like pain or suffering. Well, if there's a God, then why is? Okay, you're right. There's no God because there's suffering. Okay, see? I just discredited your God because he's not all powerful. Because if he was, he'd do this. We'll talk about that, but not today. And of course, as we go through Daniel, we're going to understand the futility of paganism. Here's the deal. This is nothing new. When we grew up, or you grew up, and I grew up, my sports team is better than your sports team. My dad's stronger than your dad. My car's faster than your car. It's always that. Well, listen, when you get into the ancient world, it was always my God's bigger than your God. My God's better than your God. Now, there are stories all the time. You see this in the Old Testament, which we don't have time to go back to all these. Well, so now think about this. Nebuchadnezzar, he loots the temple in Jerusalem, takes the vessels back, puts them in his temple, in his trophy case, and you know what he's saying? See, my God's bigger than your God. See, my God arm wrestled your God and won. I got the vessels to prove it. See, Hebrew Christianity, it's gone. See, it's totally discredited. Now, how about that? Take those apples, right? Wow. See? Oh, you're right. You're right, Neb. There's no God because you got the vessels. You're right. You won. You're right. We serve an inferior God. Your God's the big boy now, okay? See, we do that all the time, so this is not new. But I'm just saying from the outside, looks like God lost. All right, we're going to talk about that. Number 6, there's a lot of public witnessing in a hostile and agonistic culture in the book of Daniel. Now, Daniel, when he gets to Babylon, look, this is a totalitarian society. Everything is run from the top, from the king, Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, he's got complete control. Dictator, kind of like North Korea. I saw where the leader of North Korea was voted best dressed in his country for, 10th, 11th, whatever time. Amazing, right? Wow. Wow. I bet you he could arm wrestle 2,000 North Koreans and he would win every time. Wow, that's just so amazing. Because if it ever went the other way, poof, off with his head. I don't know what they do with. Listen, you know, folks, we live. I don't know. When I lived in Kenya, this is just 35 years ago. It was not unusual for 20, 30, 50 people to be killed and their bodies thrown in a truck because they, went against something the president of the country said at the time. Man, listen, we live in such a great country. Anyway. But nonetheless, Daniel was living in a totalitarian society, which means that he controlled the schools and what they taught. And so we're going to see that next week too. It always bothered me living in Charlottesville, but several years ago, we had a climatologist that was fired because he didn't believe at the time or whatever in global warming or whatever, and so they fired him. And I'm like, well, that's odd. I thought the university is where you had diverse opinions, but apparently it depends on what your opinion is. I mean, whatever. I was telling Carol this week, I got a book by a theologian who does not believe the Bible is inspired, and he doesn't believe Moses wrote the first 5 books. I mean, he just doesn't believe a lot of stuff. But he's still okay, but that's okay. But I still have his book, and let me tell you, I love his book. I love it. Listen, just because you have a different opinion than me doesn't mean you don't have a lot of good thoughts. You know what I'm saying? But in a totalitarian society, no, you only teach what I approve, and that's it. So, but that's where Daniel is. Now, I want you to understand that because he is a God follower to the nth degree. Anyway, we're going to get into all that because we're going to see it throughout the book. And there's a lot of public witnessing in the book. Number 7. Well, Jesus himself recommended that we study it. Matthew 24:15. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, and we'll get there. It's in chapter 9. You have to wait a while. Standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Oh, that'll be a fun passage. So we'll get there. But it's 9 chapters away. But you have to admit, to get your name mentioned by Jesus is pretty cool. I don't care how you cut it. He didn't mention everybody's name, at least that's recorded in the New Testament, but Daniel, pretty cool, I think, huh? Okay, you might not think it's cool, but I do. If he'd ever said, boy, it was like Mike said in one of his messages, that would be cool. Okay. I know some of you came in here today, logged on to the public Wi-Fi because you knew I would say something really good and you'd want to tweet it out or put it on Facebook. How many of y'all did that? Thank you. Okay, yeah. There goes my self-esteem in the toilet right away. I know you're thinking, I don't have time. If I do that, I'll miss the next sentence. I don't have time. It always amazes me. I'm watching a football game. They say, well, you can log on right now to the website and you can do this. I'm watching the game. How would I do all that other stuff? I am not that, whatever you call it, where I can do 4 things. Anyway, I got to move on. Number 8. All right, number 8. Oh, I love this one. The author, Daniel, is a man of deep, genuine piety. 3 times in this book, Daniel is called greatly beloved by God. Now look, I know God loves all of us equally. I got that. But that amazes me, to be greatly beloved by God. Now, let me just say this. I'm expecting Daniel to raise the bar on discipleship. Kind of like what Jesus did when he preached the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus said, you know, you've heard this. Y'all have heard this in the Old Testament. Oh, but I tell you. And Jesus kept raising the bar. Kept raising the bar. And we keep lowering the bar. No. What if we raise the bar? Anyway, just a lot to learn from his life. So this will kind of be a book study and a character study all wrapped up in one. Now, it's not that we mimic Daniel, but we learn from him. For instance, Daniel, we'll see this. He had a habit of, he would pray at his house, and he had a window, and he would open the window, and he would pray towards Jerusalem. Did that 3 times a day. Now, I'm not going to go, if we ever get our house done, I'm not going to open up the window so you can drive by and with your binoculars and see me praying. I'm not going to do that, but there's still stuff to learn. All right? But we'll learn a lot. A lot of great stories, and God gave us a lot of stories in the Bible. I mean, it's story after story after story after story. One thing it does, he usually reveals something about himself. And we learn more and more about God as we read the stories. Psalm 78 says, "Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I'll utter dark sayings from of old, things that we have heard and known, things that our fathers or our grandmothers told us. We'll not hide them from their children, but we'll tell it to the coming generation." That's what my grandmother did. "The glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done, that the next generation might know them, the children yet unborn, and arise and tell them to their children, so that they should set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, that they should not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, the generations whose heart was not steadfast, whose spirit was not faithful to God." Well, Daniel was a man of deep, genuine piety. Well, number nine. It's a realistic survivor manual for believers. You know, how do you get through some things? How do you survive the culture? I had a professor who's very well known. And I had him in some graduate classes in the area of marriage, family, counseling, all that. And he got his doctorate from UVA. And this was like 30 years ago or whatever. And so when he was at UVA, he had to take a class in like human sexuality. So his professor knew he was a believer. I mean, he was a professor at Liberty. And so she knew he was a believer, and she wasn't. So she would use the most offensive sexual language that she could while teaching the class. This is at UVA, just to mock his faith. Now, that's just how it's going to be, all right? You can't get around that, but, you know, he got through because he had to have the class to finish his doctoral degree. And he knew why she was doing that. I mean, he wasn't in the class. Her language would have probably been different, but it wasn't because, so on. Well, Daniel, and we're going to see it, he was ridiculed, conspired against. He survived it all. Listen, people know about your faith. Listen, I've had my faith laughed at, ridiculed, talked about. I've been on construction sites and guys say, they're laughing at you. I know. So, laughed at Jesus. They did. She's not dead. She's just sleeping. Ha ha! You're a wacko, man. They laughed at Jesus all the time. Just what they do. Expect it. So how do you survive that? And everybody mocks you and laughs at you. So we'll learn some things. He persevered. And let's understand something. Daniel is writing around the year 530 BC. Where are the Jews? They're in exile. They're in Babylon. And they want to know if there's any hope. Any hope. Daniel's book was loved during the 2nd century BC. And we'll get into a little bit of that history. When the Jews were greatly persecuted by Antiochus Epiphanes. I mean, it's just incredible. And you can read a lot about that in the book of 2nd Maccabees, which is a part of the Apocrypha. A lot of history in that book. And so on. And you're like, and this book brought the Jews living in those times great encouragement. So Daniel wrote his book to encourage people who were living in antagonistic cultures. Kind of like living in America. Even as Christian as we are, in the sense that we can go to church every week, we practice freedom of religion and all that, we still live in an antagonistic culture. We just do. So, problems tend to stay the same. People are the same. Discouragement's always there. Challenges are always there. And so on. But the Bible's an incredible book. Supernatural. Transcends time. And there's a lot to learn. Isn't it amazing? Even when Jesus was around in Luke chapter 24, he talked about, this is the Old Testament. He's talking about, at the time it was just several hundred years old. And he talked about how relevant it was. He talked about it. It's an incredible book. And in Matthew 5, in his Sermon on the Mount, he said, heaven and earth will pass away. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words, they'll never pass away. My words transcend time. The Bible transcends time. Wow, incredible. So Daniel, 15 years old, taken hostage, foreign country, enrolled in the school, free room and board, all of that, indoctrinated, even given a new name, which is huge. We'll get to all that. And he not only survived as a believer, he thrived. He thrived. You have to wonder why the church as a whole has thrived often when it's faced the most hostility. Anyway, don't have time to do a lot of church history, but it is incredible. All right, number 10, it is the key. Daniel is the key to prophetic revelation, which, by the way, is a litmus test for deity. Isaiah chapter 41 says, tell us what is to come hereafter, that we may know that you are gods, do good and do harm, that we may be dismayed and terrified. Here's what I want to know. Can you predict the future? That's the litmus test for God. Isaiah 46, I am God, there's none other. I am God, there's none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, from ancient times, things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose. Incredible. Incredible. So we'll see that. It's just an incredible book. You know, I don't know what you think of when you think of prophecy. Okay, I first started studying prophecy once again in the 1970s. Now, the 1970s, books are flying off the press. It's sweeping the nation, and people are speculating, sensationalizing. One guy even wrote a book while Jesus was coming back, like even in 1988. Just for the record, that book's not selling right now. It's not on. It's just kind of, obviously he was wrong. People were always setting dates. Oh, listen, I remember a time. Listen, this was in the spring of 1978. So I go listen to this well-known preacher. I think, well, I'll go listen to him. So I go to hear him. And I still remember it. So this is like April. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. And he's going through all that. He says, by October of this year, and he's laying everything out. Okay, he had to bury that message. You know what I mean? He got rid of those tapes. I mean, people were speculating, sensationalizing, and all this stuff. And here's the deal. If you do a message on prophecy in 1970, you should be able to do the same one 50 years later. Are you with me? Now, we will talk about some things, and it's clear. I'm going to wrap up my message. But obviously, as we get closer, our understanding becomes clearer. But you shouldn't have to totally change your message. But anyway, there was a lot of sensationalism. And we probably overindulged. I know I did. I had to pull back. I read books that thick. I mean, I devoured everything I could. And I don't recommend that. For a point, I did it for a few years. But anyway, it's a great book. It's a great book. But prophecy and studying a book should be a stimulating exercise. It really should be. Not only that, when the Bible was written, a lot of it was prophetic. When it was written, a lot of it was. And then prophecy does demonstrate that God is in control. And hey, Daniel wrote it because prophecy encourages and comforts people. Right? And it does encourage holiness. It did for Daniel. So I don't know why the study of prophecy doesn't happen enough today. I think, here's what I think. I think it's true, but we've become more functional in our, we go to a text, I want to know how it's going to help me like this hour. That doesn't mean anything to me today, so we don't read it. And we become, it's almost like, how could you possibly take in everything you're going to need 11 years from now today? What you may need in 11 years, you may get today, not 11 years from now. But I think that's one thing that hurts us as believers. If we come at it totally from a functional standpoint, listen, I get that. Because what will happen is when you're in deep pain, it's like that's your filter. So you start reading the Bible through that filter of your pain, and it's like, okay, you just read, and if you don't see anything for you at that moment, it doesn't mean anything. And that's just not going to be healthy long term. But the book of Daniel does remind us that God is in control. Despite any cultural decay, any geopolitical uprisings or wars or whatever you see, God's still in control. He's still in control of the rise and fall of world leaders, kings, presidents, or whatever their names are. Doesn't make sense. If I was God, I'd get rid of the guy in North Korea tomorrow. No, probably today. Today. I'd probably get rid of the guy in Iran too. I mean, that's just me. But I'm not God. And I'm like, well, why would you even let these people? And you've got your list of 38 people you'd get rid of today. Yeah, you would. Not God. I don't know why. Why did God let Nebuchadnezzar become king of Babylon and destroy Jerusalem? We're going to get into all that. All right? All right. All I know is it seems like every year our knowledge and understanding of the Scriptures in the American society tends to go down. Why does Bible literacy go down every year? We have more tools, more visual aids, more fascinating stuff. It should be rising. It really should. Maybe we've just settled for what's on the surface. But Proverbs chapter 2 says, if you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. Boy, you've got to dig and dig and dig. You just do. You just do. All right, number 11. I got to finish, right? It gives the meaning of history better than any other book. Listen, Daniel, it gives us a panorama of human history from 605 BC to the end. It does. So we'll look at all that. We know how it will end. We do. You have Revelation, that's how it ends. All right? A new heaven, new earth. That's how it ends. Number 12. It's a great book for apologetics. I mean, it really is. I mean, okay, the book of Daniel is a prime target for the critics. First of all, it has prophecy in it. It has miracles in it. Now, critics are people who do not believe in the Bible per se. They don't believe you can prophesy. You can't. It's impossible. They get rid of all the supernatural and all that. Listen, from the very beginning, Satan has tried to sow seeds of doubt. And so the critics come along and they will sow seeds of doubt. Oh, that sounds pretty good. Oh, that sounds pretty good. Oh, that sounds really good. I mean, there's a guy at Duke. He's very good. He's very good. He's a great public speaker. And and if you listen to him, you're like, wow, he's so good. So good. He must be right. Oh, I got it. So if you're a charismatic speaker, everything you say is right. Oh, charismatic, you convince me. You're good. Everything you say is right. Okay. Whatever. And so there are a lot of critics, and if you ever want to know what the critics have to say about the Bible, they're out there. Dime a dozen on the book of Daniel. All right? But here's what I know. Jesus put his stamp of approval on the book of Daniel. So, if you buy in to the criticism that Daniel was not written under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, Daniel did not put any prophecies in his book, the stories are not true, the miracles are not true, you got to deal with Jesus. So you got to go through, so you better forget Daniel. You better start with Jesus and the resurrection. You got to get rid of him first. Because, see, here's the deal. People have all these problems with the Old Testament. You know, Jesus didn't. You know, Jesus quoted Genesis, Deuteronomy, Daniel, and lots of places. Isaiah. So, and the critics, they attack Genesis, Deuteronomy. I mean, they attack all these people Jesus quotes. So, you got to deal. You better deal with Jesus first. Forget about all that. All I'm saying, it's a great place to go. All right? Anyway, good stuff. All right, number 13. It's another source where God reveals himself. So we will learn much more about God. It will expand our knowledge of God. Number 14. Your hope in the future will be rekindled. Hey, listen. The book of Daniel opens at the beginning of a very dark period in Israel's history, 605 BC. And it looks like God is done with Israel. They're gone, taken out of the land. The temple is destroyed. Jerusalem's left in ruins. It's over. It's over. No, it's not over. It just looks like it's over. God still has a plan. And so Daniel will inspire you to persevere and live a fully devoted life despite the appearances that God may have bailed on you. And then finally, it's simply an extraordinary book. Daniel 12:4. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Now, this is near the end of the book of Daniel, so we're not going to talk about it today or tomorrow or next week. But here's what he's saying. As we get closer to the end, knowledge will increase for those who read and study the book of Daniel. But here's the deal. It won't increase unless you study it. So we will. For the next, 15 weeks, 18 weeks, we'll just see. We'll spend 4 weeks. 1, 2, 3. 3 weeks in Daniel chapter 1. 2 weeks in Daniel chapter 2, and we'll just work our way through the book. But we're going to study the book of Daniel, and I think it'll be fun. It will be. Because I figure if I'm having fun, you're having fun. All right? All right.